Welcome back to our Analytic Philosophy Masterclass. Last time we dismantled the liar paradox, a puzzle that struck at the very heart of truth itself. Today we are taking things even further, into a paradox that challenges our ability to define anything at all. Imagine a heap of sand. You see it, I see it. Clearly it's a heap, right? But what if we remove just one grain? It's still a heap, right? What about another grain? And another, and another, and another? At what point does it stop being a heap? This is the Sorites paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap, and it exposes a fundamental flaw in how we use language, define categories, and understand reality itself. It sounds like a silly problem, but as we will see, this paradox is not just about sand. It applies to language, logic, and even the way we make decisions in everyday life. So how do we solve it? Or more disturbingly, can it even be solved? Let's start with simple observation. We rely on vague concepts all the time. We talk about being rich or poor, tall or short, young or old. But if you think about it, these words don't have clear, sharp boundaries. For example, imagine someone with $1,000,000. Most would call them rich. Now imagine someone with only $1. Definitely not rich. But what about $100,000 or $200,000? At what point does someone go from not rich to rich? The same logic applies to boldness. And a man with a full head of hair is clearly not bold. If he loses one hair, he's still not bold. But if he keeps losing hair one by one, at what exact moment does he become bold? This is the Sorites paradox in action. It's not just about sand, it's about how we categorize reality itself. But perhaps the most profound application of Sorites paradox is not about external objects at all. If the Sorites paradox shows us that definitions are blurry, then what happens when we apply this logic to identity itself? Can we ever truly define what it means to be you? Consider your physical body. Every day you shed millions of cells while creating new ones. If losing one cell does not make you a different person, and neither does a two cell, at what precise point would you cease to be you? After replacing 10% of your cells, 50% or 90%? Or take your memories and experiences. If forgetting one childhood moment does not change who you are fundamentally, and neither does losing two such moments, then at what exact point would memory loss transform you into someone else? Your personality too shifts gradually over time. The 5-year-old you, and the current you might share little in common, yet you consider them the same person. There was never a single moment you became someone else. The transformation was imperceptibly gradual, grain by grain. This application of the Sorites paradox suggests something profound. Perhaps identity is not a fixed state with clear boundaries, but rather a continuous process or even a convenient fiction. We are not static entities, but processes in constant flux, like rivers that maintain their identity despite their waters constantly changing. So how do we deal with this? Philosophers have proposed several possible answers, but none of them are really satisfying. Let's go through them. First is the cutoff point solution, epistemicism. Some philosophers argue that some philosophers, most notably Timothy Williamson, argue that there is a precise point where a heap stops being a heap, but we just don't know what it is. According to this view, vague terms like heap have sharp boundaries in reality, but these boundaries are fundamentally unknowable to us. For example, there could be an exact number, perhaps 1,000 grains, that constitutes the threshold for being a heap. If so, then 1,000 grains would form a heap, while 991 grains would not, even though we could never perceive this difference. The problem? It seems completely arbitrary. What makes the 1,000th grain so special that it transforms a non-heap into a heap? There's no apparent natural reason why any particular grain should have this magical property. Moreover, if these precise boundaries exist but are impossible for us to detect, what makes them real at all? This solution preserves classical logic but at the cost of positing unknownable facts about language. It does not feel natural. It just shifts the problem from where's the boundary to why can't we know the boundary that supposedly exists? When applied to identity, this becomes even more troubling. Would there be some exact imperceptible moment when you cease to be you after cellular replacements? Uh, it's hard to accept such a view when the transition appears so gradual. Second is the fuzzy logic solution. Another approach is to reject the idea that things are either 100% true or 100% false. Instead, truth comes in degrees. A 10,000 grain pile is very much a heap, maybe 100% of heapness. A 5,000 grain pile is kind of a heap, maybe 70% of heapness, and a 500 grain pile is barely a heap, maybe 30% heapness. This fuzzy logic approach works well in some cases. AI, for example, often uses fuzzy logic to interpret vague human comments, but it also raises the problem. Are we really solving the paradox or just avoiding it by redefining things? Supervaluationism. Maybe vagueness is built into language. A third approach says that vagueness is not bugging our reasoning. It's a feature of how language works. This is called supervaluations, developed by philosophers like David Lewis, as I remember. According to this view, words like heap simply don't have a single, clear definition. Instead, they allow for multiple possible ways to draw the line. And all of these ways are equally valid interpretations or precisifications of the term. Here's how it works. Imagine we have many different ways to make heap precise. In one acceptable precisification, a heap requires at least 1000 grains. In another, it's 500 grains. In yet another, it's 10,000 grains. The word heap does not commit us to any particular precisification. It's inherently open to this range of interpretations. A statement about heaps is then super true if it's true under all acceptable precisifications. For example, 10,000 grains form a heap would be super true because it's true no matter where we set the threshold. Similarly, 5 grains do not form a heap would also be super true. But statements in the borderline area, like 750 grains form a heap, are neither super true nor super false, since they are true under some precisifications and false under others. In other words, there's no objective fact of the matter about when exactly a heap stops being a heap. Instead, the word heap has a range of meanings, and different people might use it slightly differently without any of them being wrong. But does this mean that truth is subjective? Can reality really be defined by our words? That's where things get uncomfortable. Supervaluationism avoids extreme relativism by maintaining that some statements are definitely true and others definitely false. But it also acknowledges a gray area where our language simply does not determine a precise answer. At first glance, the Sorites paradox seems like a fun word game. But once you start applying it to the real world, things get serious. Like, legal systems struggle with it. When does a fetus become a person? When does an immigrant become a citizen? When does self-defense become murder? Our legal systems depend on precise rules, but reality is not always so clear-cut. Laws often rely on arbitrary cutoffs, which leads to controversial and inconsistent rulings. Science struggles with it. When does a new species emerge in evolution? When does a cloud stop being a cloud? When does a pile of atoms become human? Biology, physics, and even artificial intelligence all run into vague boundaries that defy clean definitions. Morality struggles with it. How many lies make someone a liar? How many crimes make someone a criminal? How many kindness make someone a good person? If moral judgments depend on vague concepts, then can ethics ever be precise? So, can we solve the Sorites paradox? We have explored various ways to approach this paradox, cutoff points, fuzzy logic, and supervaluationism, but none provide a perfect answer. And maybe that's the point. Perhaps the problem is not with our reasoning, but with the way we expect reality to fit neatly into categories. We want sharp boundaries, clear definitions, and precise truths, but the world resists simplification. What if vagueness is not a flaw in logic, but a fundamental feature of existence? What if identity, morality, and even truth itself are not fixed points but shifting continua? If that's the case, then the question is not where do we draw the line, but rather why do we assume a line must exist at all? That's all for today. Thanks for your attention. See you soon.